Kenya. And to mobilize those resources, it has two avenues. One is taxation, which is the primary one, and the other is debt, which is simply supposed to be a top-up. That is all, a top-up. In fact, if you read the Constitution carefully, it is very clear that they expect us to have what you call a balanced budget, that we live within our means, the resources we're able to mobilize. Now, our 2010 Constitution and subsequent PFM, Public Finance Management Act, anchored what you call financial controls on our resources. Those financial controls embedded in the Constitution, embedded in PFM, are law. In other words, you are not supposed to breach those provisions. But what happened from 2013 when the law became active? This is where we say, because we have bothered to do, I believe, the first forensic audit on our public debt, this is when the rain started beating us. This is when the biggest fraud on the people of Kenya occurred. And if you don't mind, I would like to explain this in detail. One thing my late father taught me a long time ago is that to be a leader or to be able to talk to people, you must be able to teach. People must learn. When they learn, they grow in their knowledge and their scrutiny. So we bothered to commission an audit on our public debt. And this audit is called a forensic audit. A forensic audit is an audit that looks at fraud or has not been followed in the procurement of our public debt. So when the president the other day said he's got a forensic audit team, or task force as he called it, the first thing I looked at is on all those appointees, there's no forensic auditor at all. A forensic auditor is a very different breed from just a simple auditor. These are licensed people. And we bothered to get what was the foremost forensic auditor in Kenya, a man called Bernard Muchere, who had done a lot of internal audit for government for the last 41 years. He headed the team, and within, let's say, about 4 to 5 months, he had completed the entire job. These records are public, so there was nothing that was hidden. So what happens is that our laws anchor this debt. It says, for example, that debt must be on the budget. Number one. It says that debt in the medium to long term should only be taken for development. Number two. It says that you cannot borrow for recurrent expenditure. In other words, to pay salaries, or if people want to get on a jet plane to fly off to America, you can't pay for that. You can't pay for any other expenditure other than development. And then it says, number three, that if you want to borrow because you have cash flow problems, you can, but it must be within 1 year, and it must be paid within that 1 year. And on top of that, it gives a maximum, a ceiling. And the ceiling says this: it cannot be 5% more, it can only be a maximum of 5% of the total tax revenue, audited tax revenue returns of the previous financial year. So if you collected 2 trillion in tax revenue, then 5% means that you cannot take more than 100 billion. It also goes further to say that that is expected to be an overdraft at CBK. Now, that is the basis of our laws. One other provision I might like to say is what is called Article 214. Article 214 says there is the consolidated fund where all our revenue must be put in. So whether it's tax revenue, whether it is debt revenue, it must be put in one simple fund called the consolidated fund, one account, nothing else. So where did the rain start beating us? In 2013, the Uhuru Ruto government went to the parliament and they proposed an amendment number 1 to the Consolidated Fund, an amendment through the Public Finance Management Act, that you amend the Constitution, Article 214, through the Public Finance Management Act, which, as you and I know, is an illegality. You cannot amend the Constitution through an act. And they added 2 more provisions that were not in the Constitution, saying that money, in essence, do not have to enter the Consolidated Fund. That was the first. The second is that they introduced something called Supplementary Budget Number 2. Supplementary Budget Number 2 was another foundation of fraud. If you read the provisions in the Constitution on a supplementary budget, first, it is an addition to the budget that has been passed by the end of June that year. So it is just supplementing the items there. And there is a maximum that the addition cannot be more than 10%. Now, that means that there's a ministry, for example, that is building a road, and they find that it was 100 shillings, and the cost has gone up to 110, so they ask for the 10 more. But it is already in the budget, 100 shillings. Now here, in Supplementary 2, they suddenly decided they're introducing something called a new budget. A new budget with the new projects that were not in the previous budget passed in the appropriations of that June. So this is where the fraud began. Now, the fraud began with those 2. So money started being borrowed that were not on the budget. Money started going into accounts that were not the Consolidated Fund. And our summary is simply this. And I'll give you a summary from July 2013 all the way to June 2023. 10 years. Remember, I said debt is a top-up. It is not a principle. So we said, let us look at the accounts of government. What is the government expenditure? How much did the government put on the budget for development? It was 6 trillion shillings. How much did they put for the counties? We put the figure. How much are their salaries over those 10 years? We put the figure. How much were their operations expenses? We put the figure. How much were their pensions? We put the figure. One item we removed, because this is what is called a primary balance, we removed one item called any debt payments. So we found a figure of 14.6 trillion. We said, very good. That's the sum total of 10 years. Fantastic. So how much income did we get? How much was KRA stating that they got? All right? So KRA, we did their actuals, not estimates. It's simple math. We calculated simple math, and that figure over that period was 13.3 trillion. So we had what you call a shortage of only 1.3 trillion. 1.3 trillion was the only item that was needed for a budget, for all those budgets of 10 years. That is the top up that was required. That is what many economists like to call the deficit. Nice, simple, clean, 1.3 trillion. So we said, okay, how much did we borrow? We borrowed, Eric, to your shock, a figure of 7.7 trillion over the same period. In other words, if you do the subtraction of 1.3, 6.4 trillion more than we needed, more than was on any budget that had been put forward, more than any approval from Parliament, because Parliament approves a budget where the debt is anchored. That means that 6.4 did not go to anything for the sovereign called the Kenyan. is simply a heist. But we didn't stop there. We went on and we said, in the same period, how much money was allocated to debt payments? How much of our taxes, the ones that Kenyans sweat to pay, went towards our debt payments? Our figures had ended because we had done July, up to July 2022, we found we had paid 5.6 trillion. To June 2023, we added another 1.4. So there you have 7 trillion. Then this last financial year that has just passed, with the controversial bill that you're seeing people rejected, this last financial year, we paid another 1.8. So that is 9.8 trillion we have paid for debt payments, right? We overborrowed by 6.4. Okay? What are we being asked for today? The figure is 11 trillion. This figure does not come down. When we did our audit in 2022, it was 8.5. Today, it's going to 11 trillion. You now balance it between how much, what the dollar exchange rate is. This is a phenomena that we cannot deal with. This is a grievous fraud, and we are never meant to pay it. It is our chain, it is our slavery. And let me put that slavery in context as to the debt that has been taken. Two things I want to say. Our biggest problem is that you must understand that debt is tax in advance. Our taxes have to pay it. So, you go back to our history, even before we had these great laws in the Constitution and PFM, Public Finance Management. When Moi handed over the economy of Kenya to Mwai Kibaki, Moi was collecting 170 billion in tax revenue. And he was paying, of every 100 shillings of that tax revenue, 28 shillings towards debt payment. He had in 1995 appealed to donors, in other words, the creditors, at a group called the Paris Club, and had gotten softer repayment terms. He was paying 28. He had rescheduled his debt. He was paying 28 shillings of every 100 to debt. So Kibaki takes the economy and he hands it over to Uhuru in 2013. And at that point, Kibaki has taken revenue to 1 trillion shillings, just under. Just under. And you know how much he was paying to debt of every 100? 18 shillings of every 100 shillings was going to debt payment. So he had brought it down. Great. We had seen the modernization of Kenya because Kibaki is the father of Kenya's modern age. In 2022, Uhuru Muigai Kenyatta, but I must say Uhuru and Ruto were in the same government, hands over to Ruto. And at that point, revenue had gone to something like 2.1 trillion. Double. But 70 shillings of every 100 was going to debt. Today, as we are talking, 80 shillings, just under 80 shillings of every 100 of tax revenue we sweat and contribute goes towards the payment of one item called debt. So you can understand why he wants to come and tax us more and do everything he can, because we are at that state where you have just a manager who is simply just receiving money and paying debt. He's not managing any other affair. That is the critical nature.
Wait, Jimmy. What did you say? I had something 80, 100 something. Can you repeat it so that it gets deeper into our own marrow?
Yes. Let me repeat it. Eric, can you hear me now?
Yes.
Okay. Let me repeat.
We lost you.
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Can you hear me now?
Just repeat
Okay.
that bit of 80, 80, 100, something.
Yeah. I will come back.
How are our taxes being used? One person in his own personal account having 7.4 billion. 7.4 billion. You go up to Bungoma, where I come from, where poverty is the order of the day. 100 million is siphoned from Bungoma. What are you saying, Juan? What are you saying? What is he saying?
Yes, go on. What are you saying? Hello, Jimmy. We lost you. Mercy, I can see you here. How are you, Mercy?
Can you hear me?
Just hold on, Jimmy. Mercy?
Can you hear me, Amerix? Amerix,
Just hold
can you
on
hear
a
me?
bit, Jimmy, we lost you. Mercy, can you hear
Okay.
me? Mercy?
Mercy?
We can hear you.
Yes, go on. Can you tell us what happened? Why? Because we say debt. The debt problem is because of the political class. And the political class begin this problem by hoodwinking the people down there, the rural people, the voters. They con and steal from them. Then they graduate from the rural voters to the treasury. Can you please tell us, Mercy, what happened down there in Uasin Gishu? Mercy.